I know of really no other insurers that pick that up. They may get into the market eventually, but planning and zoning issues are more construction and contracts. Contracts aren't covered per se either.
I'd have to say I can't ever think of any litigation that I've ever seen where a planning commissioner or a planning commission has been named individually. The appeal is always taken from the decision of the governing body, which there's statutory timeframes to take appeals from those decisions from the governing body's decision. So I'd be really strained to find a situation where a planning commissioner or a planning commission would engage in final action, which could result in litigation.
They have their own relief process.
Okay, we have the letter that was sent. It specifically mentions claims in regards to issuing of bonds and things and how those would be no coverage, but through ordinance they aren't allowed to issue their own bonds. I'm wondering, though, the first bullet point is there's no independent coverage. What sort of claims, because we haven't really talked through what sort of claims they wouldn't be covered of, what sort of claims do, or should not, anticipate is not the right word, but what sort of claims would you see as someone being open to in that regard that they wouldn't have coverage for?
You'll help me. You didn't use a large word in that entire question, but somehow I still missed it.
Sure. Okay. Well, I know it specifically addresses in the instance that the board were to try and issue its own bonds, which they can't do. So the other question I have then is what sort of claims would actually come into play that you think that there wouldn't be coverage for? Because we've not had a history of that, so there's no examples of what we might not be protected of.
Could result in the financing and questions to you that you did not secure the appropriate amount of interest rates that were available in the marketplace, your fiduciary responsibilities. Right. It would all come down to money decisions.
No, not relying specifically to the bonds itself. Issues outside, whatever, issues that the EUB would actually, under the way it's organized now, have under their charge. Beyond bond itself, because we actually have outside bond counsel, so they wouldn't.
What other types of claims could come to the EUB?
Exactly, that's it, yes, sir.
If you allow me, what I'll do is I'll just kind of use an example because it helps me understand better. If I were to come in here on next Tuesday and sit in an office, an unoccupied office, and start issuing dictates about repairing streets and dispatching fire equipment and employment decisions and those kinds of things, there'd be a few people ask some questions rapidly. A couple might be amused, the majority would not, as to what's going on. And finally, the question would come, by what authority are you doing this? I said, well, I don't have any authority. I just was kind of felt like it was a good thing to do, an important thing to do. Those are the things that are going to come to the EUB. Why, by what authority did you make these decisions, personnel decisions? You terminated me, you demoted me, but you didn't have legal standing, you weren't my supervisor, you didn't do this. So is that a true termination then? It could be questioned on those kinds of issues, as well as any other decision that they make. You can take the body of the resolution and come back and say, what effect did that have on whoever? And then whoever could come back and say, not a binding decision. The EUB did not have the authority to bind the city to that decision. That's your exposure.
What about like pricing contracts?
Contracts
for buying electricity, establishing rates, that type of thing.
Okay. Again, they don't have the authority to bind. So rates could come into question. Right? Kind of scary.
Except we just endorsed the rates that were at our last meeting.
Yeah.
So you can take rates out of the equation.
Yeah. I trust everybody understands I am not an attorney.
Right.
Some of these would go direct to Kansas law. Some of them went in. There's always an argument or a debate or a fine point with those. But in generalities, I can tell you how the claim would probably be crafted. That part I see.
Well, and I think the key is if there was a claim brought before and it had something specific to do with the EUB, what you're saying is, even from a litigation perspective, you guys would not be involved. So basically, even if we wanted to fight it, if we felt that it was an unfair claim, that money would come from reserve to represent this.
You know, that's the bad news, and I've read the history of this discussion, and I understand it's powerful, and it's meaningful, and I'm not here to trample on anybody's opinion or to involve myself in the back and forth of debate, but I think I can help you. If our roles are reversed, things that I do, if I was in your position, I would want to know those 2 or 3 things that I brought. I prepared 4 slides, if that would be helpful. Is there a way to get those up? This time? I'm going to grab my water as I go. Promise to come back.
Going to hold you to that.
This is important. Your discussion and what you're trying to do here, I have been in rooms that the best you could do is pick up the pieces and make whatever you can with those. But tonight, this is all fixable. This is all fixable. And that's good, and our organization would help you on a look-back basis to find ways to cover your activities of those things that you knew nothing about. I mean, why would anybody want to run for public office if they were held for some decision that was made 37 years ago or this or that? That's not who we are, and that's not what we're about. But what we do try to do is keep the thing rocking down the center of Kansas law and other law of 2014. There's one exclusion, and this is the only exclusion I'm really going to talk about tonight. So without doing too much rehearsal, policy tells you what's covered, and then it goes through this exclusion side and tells you, yeah, but we're not going to cover these things. So you have your coverage. You can go over those sometime. But the one exclusion at 3.37 is any violation of a member's fiduciary responsibilities as respects public funds. And I found it interesting because I haven't had a bond question in my 9 years here. But bonds are specifically listed. So in the drafting of this specific exclusion, someone had in their mind that this could arise, and it's arisen with you, at least it's before you in the future, is you're the member, you, Gardner, you, the member, Gardner City Council, you, Gardner Management, everyone's covered. But you have to follow your responsibility. And your responsibility is to follow the law as respects anything you do with bond obligations. If you don't, that's specific in the coverage document that there would be no coverage. So that's pretty finite. I would want to know that. It's there, it's not ambiguous. It was intentionally put in there. I could kind of load on, but that's not my goal. My goal is to pass information, and that language is specifically in there, and you should know that. Right click. All right. Definition of a member. Why did I bring that up? Because there's already been kind of a question. Who's covered? Anybody that's ever sat on this council, any volunteer that you designate, anybody that you appoint on a committee as this group, but what is on is the word official. Our difficulty with the EUB is they're not official. You know, they're not an employee, they're not this and that, and they just don't meet the definition of official, and it's that word that's there. They can't bind the city. I've already mentioned that. That's critical. To miss that point is to miss a lot. Any consideration of yours under the present structure to continue with because now you know. You know, before, however many years it's been or months of this, it was operating and there were no questions. But now it's been identified and you have that fiduciary responsibility. And there's numerous questions that could come, and there are lots of theories. When my phone rings and the attorneys start telling me their theories of why we should cover something or why the city's done something wrong, not trying to be lighthearted, but sometimes I say, you're not near as good as the last one that called me. In 4 minutes, they already had 27 theories, and you've only developed 3 or